Hello, this is Angelica Yingst, and you're listening to Centered, grounded conversations about the metaphysical. Hi, it's Angelica. I just wanted to share a little writing I did on Mother's Day. Since today is Mother's Day in the U.S., I know it's different days around the world, but I have 3 living children, Beatrice, Thomas, and Zachary. And I have a child that was stillborn at 38 weeks in 2008. And I've had a number of miscarriages, so I've been pregnant quite a bit more than children I have. Double, maybe, more than double. So, my first Mother's Day was in 2007. And then my first Mother's Day grieving was 2009. And since then, I moved to the middle of Pennsylvania and had 3 more pregnancies, 2 more living children who have never really known me as anything but a mother who both grieves and has that part of me. And I'm really far from the first tree I planted on my first Mother's Day without my daughter, far from the place where she died, where she was born, where a funeral director walked in with ashes in the smallest jar I've ever seen, and far from the people who remember me locked in my home for months on end grieving, who later whispered, "I remember when you wouldn't talk to me." I'm far from the hospital where I held Lucia's dead body in my arms and kissed her nose, and I cried and cried, and I kept saying, "I don't want to forget her." And then the nurse and everyone kind of treated me like a child and says, there, you'll never forget your daughter. And the truth is, I'm far from her death now. It's not that I've forgotten she existed. Every day I think about my second daughter and her death and going through the trauma of that. But I do forget what she looked like and smelled like and whose hair she had. And I doubt my eyewitness account. I vividly remember seeing the Easter Bunny fill my basket when I was 4, so I'm a highly unreliable witness. But I cling to these things, like what color she had, what color eyes she had, or what color I thought she had when I lifted the eyelids to peek for a second because I was afraid to touch her. And when I looked, it was purple, and I was like, that cannot be. Her eyes cannot be purple. My baby's immutable eyes are a color that doesn't appear in eyes. Or her hair seemed black, and I thought she was going to look like me, but maybe it was just that her hair was wet from birth. And this is all my warped memory can tell me of what I remember is like changed. And so I think she looks like Tommy, but does she? Did she? I don't know. She looks like Zachary. Did she? Will she? I don't know. All those things I thought were really important seem meaningless now. And they aren't my memory. They're things that I projected onto that memory, And why am I getting so heady about it? Well, that's the problem, The thing I'm really grieving is not her eye color, her hair color. They're the things 14-year-olds embody, the things I'm missing: snarkiness and humor and intelligence and energy and possibilities and dreams, and the point when she grows taller than my mom, and then the point where she grows taller than me, which, honestly isn't that far from my mom, but, Lucia will always be a baby, and that's what I grieve most, that she was never 5 or 10 or 14, and she never lived a life of mistakes and grace. And Mother's Day, it's complicated for me. It's not just complicated for me, though. It's complicated for so many of us. I remember hearing on NPR that only 50% of women in the U.S. are mothers. And I mean, I could easily say a whopping 50%, But in the end, it's like half the women that probably are wrestling with this complicated holiday because they're mothers. Maybe it's lovely for them. That's awesome if it's lovely for you. Maybe it's that they have no partner to orchestrate any Mother's Day anything. Or their partner doesn't care, or they're grieving the loss of a child like me, or it gets muddied and weird by the demands of their in-laws or their own mothers, or their awkward husbands or estranged mothers, or awkward mothers and estranged husbands, or they're wrestling with grief from their mother's death. And then there's the other half of women who do not have or have not birthed children, who are expected to do things to honor the women who are mothers. So they have to hear all the platitudes and hyperbole bestowed on mothers for weeks and weeks on end leading up to this day. Some that are really truly insulting to other people who love and care for children but can't be called a mother in any traditional sense. I mean, some mamas are great. They're wonderful boo-boo kissers and all that stuff. And I'll be honest, most of my circle fall into that category of being extraordinary. But other people love children and care for children. And sometimes all this focus on biological functioning and mothering feels a little fucked up to me and scary. And then there's the other part. There are abusive mothers and alcoholic mothers and narcissistic mothers and mothers who have abandoned their children or said awful things or neglect their children. And those children are wrestling with that. And all I'm saying is that Mother's Day is complicated and fraught. It's fraught with expectations. And in AA, we always say expectations are just planned resentments. So, for me, motherhood opened me up in ways I didn't know I was closed. My first daughter taught me about unconditional love and how to have joy and how to be present and laughter. And I learned about nurturing and what I want, what is my core value is kindness and compassion. And everything else falls away when I think about things. When I had Lucia and she died at birth at 38 weeks, I was in labor and she was dead. It gave me a way of being a mother that I'd never known before. She opened my heart to the deepest, rawest parts of the human experience, and she taught me that grief is love, and that I have a lot of shadows lurking way deep that I would have never seen if grief hadn't broken my heart open. And when I gave birth to her, I also gave birth to the language of grief, which had been forming in me, honestly, since I was born. So Lucy freed me with her death. She made it impossible for me to ignore the emotions I stuffed into the corners of my being. She taught me the limits of my self-will and self-reliance. And grief brought my bottom up, and I don't mean my fine ass. I mean the dark night of the soul, my alcoholic bottom. I'm glad that I don't have to barter with the universe and say, which would you rather have, your daughter or the wisdom? Because I don't think I would pick the wisdom. But I have it, I made meaning out of her death. I didn't let it make me bitter, and I didn't let it feed me. It's poison. I didn't, stuff the shadow. I let it come out. There's nothing I can say that would say like, oh, this was okay with me. It's not. But I can see now that I have so many gifts from her life and her death. And that's one of the worst sentences I can think of, but it's a truth that cannot be ignored. And I'm there only because I'm 14 years out, I've had to process. I've let that wound become my wisdom. I don't know what life would be like if she lived, but I can only say that I'm different and better because of her. And so this morning I wanted to share with you about her death to honor that I mother grief as well as my living children. And we don't see that in people, that everything is fucking complicated with people. So if someone's snarky to you or you feel obligated, today just try to ride the wave of whatever happens. I know for me, I want to see my mama. I want to be a mama. I want to laugh. I want to play. I want to have fun. I don't really want to be in grief. But the only way I know how to deal with grief is to share it and to talk about it and to say that I see you if you're grieving. Whether you lost a child, you lost a mother, or you have a complicated relationship with any of those things, I hope that you can care for yourself first. I heard this woman on TikTok, she was talking about how Mother's Day, her stepfather isn't doing anything for her mother, and her husband, or her, she's divorced, is not doing anything for her, so her sister is doing stuff for her, and she's doing stuff for her mother, and they're all doing stuff together. And she was like, this is the thing about Mother's Day, when we care, we end up caring for all of us, all the women. So, even if you don't have a child or you do have a child, you're allowed to say, I just want to be present. I just want to play cards. I just want to have my coffee. You don't owe anybody anything. So you can just say no and say, I'm grieving today. I need my alone time. I'm sorry. I say this to my children quite often, but like, I say this to my children, so I'm going to quote it. You don't owe me anything, ever. You prioritize your mental health. You don't owe me a relationship when you grow up. If I wasn't a good mother, you don't owe me that. I'm not a mother to invest in future love or future care or future money. I'm honored to be the mother of all my children, but they don't owe me anything for bringing them into the world. And like, even if you have parents that are like, no, you do owe me, you don't have to buy into that. So this is me giving you permission to just let the emotions rise and fall and ebb and flow, because they do. And I suspect it's for more of us than we admit. And, part of my sacred gift on this world is just to own my own shadow. You know, children dying has been happening since children were getting made. My child died, again, stillborn at 38 weeks, no reason. It was winter solstice 2008, totally normal pregnancy. I was in labor, my labor stopped, and I stopped feeling her move. We all die, and that's the truth of life. But when we upend the natural order, the parent surviving the child, it stands in a particular horror for us. People are like, I would never be able to do it, survive what you survived. I'm like, you would, because you have to, because we keep going, because we're human. And I remember after Lucia died, I had this yard sale, and this older couple, she later told me she was 86. She told me her third child was born. She had 5 children and her third child. And she said she grieves him every day. And I didn't even tell her that I had a stillborn child. So it was just like that synchronicity that comes in that makes us know that we're all connected, right? So she told me that she thinks about being reunited with him after she dies. And I remember I shared that story with other bereaved women, and one said, oh my God, it's horrifying to think I'd be grieving in 60 years, but not for me. Because we all grieve. Grief is part of life. But grief is part of the deal with parenting too. It's a risk to have babies. Watching your heart exist in the outside world where everything is sharp and dangerous and hot, and don't touch that. It doesn't make things any less tragic that it happens now, less than it used to, nor am I trying to diminish our losses, but simply I'm just trying to say that ancient grief ties into the myths, it ties into the, stories that we are reared with, the beginning of the world. I mean, think about Abraham and Isaac and Sarah. They were infertile. They couldn't have babies. And then she has a baby at like 80 something, whatever, when people lived very long in the Bible. And then God says, you got to sacrifice that baby. And he's like, what the, A really good book is Kierkegaard's Fear and Trembling. That is all about Abraham and Isaac. It's like, what kind of God asks you to kill your own child? And when we wrestle with that, grief, we get really to the heart of what a mother is. Mother's Day was created with grief in mind. I'll give you a little history. So Anna Jarvis founded the official Mother's Day in 1908. And she was honoring her own mother, who's Anne Reeves Jarvis. So Anna Jarvis founded it. That's the daughter of Anne Reeves Jarvis. And Anne Jarvis gave birth to like a dozen children, and only 4 survived into adulthood. Most of them passed away from diseases and measles and typhoid fever and those things. She was known as Mother Jarvis, and actually she was from Appalachia. She was a homemaker. She was a church-going woman. She taught Sunday school. She was also an activist, and in the mid-1800s, she organized the Mother's Day work clubs in West Virginia. And what she was doing was preventing unsanitary living conditions. And she was really concerned about high infant mortality rate that was pervasive in Appalachia, and wanted to educate and help mothers who needed it. And then during the Civil War, Mother Jarvis organized women's brigades, and she encouraged women to help without regard of which side the men were on. And so she proposed, after the war, a Mother's Friendship Day to promote peace between the former Union and Confederate families. Julia Ward Howe, she's a famous poet who wrote the Battle Hymn of the Republic. She was also volunteering for the U.S. Sanitary Commission, helping provide hygienic environments for hospitals. And so she kind of took on some of Mother Jarvis's brigades, helping with sanitation, helping with the hospitals for the sick and wounded soldiers. And in 1870, Julia Ward Howe called for Mother's Day for Peace. She wanted a day where mothers who were grieving the loss of their children could call for peace and the eradication of war. She felt mothers should gather, that we should see the mark of war on families and on women, in particular the mothers who were grieving these lives that men just cut down because of war. And so you have these kind of Mother's Days that come up around grief, really. High infant mortality rate, around war. And in 1905, Anna Jarvis, who, was the child of Mother Jarvis, she's from Philadelphia, she wanted to campaign for a day that just honored mothers, And she said, and this is a quote, "I hope and pray that someone sometime will found a memorial Mother's Day commemorating mothers for their service that they render to humanity in every field of life." And she said, particularly my mother, she's entitled to it. And Anna's ideas were less about public service and more about honoring the role of the mother. She wanted to honor her own mother and the sacrifices she made in the home. So she conceived of this Mother's Day as a personal celebration between mothers and families, and her day involved wearing a white carnation, almost like a badge, when visiting one's mother or attending church. But when Mother's Day became a national holiday, it was really capitalized on it. And actually by 1920, Anne Jarvis was like denouncing Mother's Day because she was so disgusted at how commercialized it became. So, just so you know, Mother's Day was created in a complex landscape of grief and loss. And so if you're struggling with Mother's Day, if you're struggling with being a mother or not being a mother or having a mother, know that peace, grief, loss, sacrifice, these are the origins of Mother's Day. So if you're grieving, honor your beautiful grief as a sacred heart opener. I'm holding space for you. The thing that connects all of us humans together is grief. My friend Kara Jones said that Mother's Day, like she said about Mother's Day, she said, "I'll celebrate with you as long as you will first mourn with me." And it's the combination of the two that lends itself to the true meaning of Mother's Day. So if we can stand together with grief and love, not, spiritually bypassing the hard feelings, the complex feelings we have about our mothers, but just honoring it as part of that landscape that we have, we can bring our own women together and stand together and speak of grief and speak of death. And we invite all the fathers who mother too, all the men who mother, of which my own husband does. He mothers a lot with my children. We can take all those mothers in a circle and heal with them. It takes a village, honey. And we need to be the village of women that allow other women to feel the feelings, the complex feelings of our emotions. Thanks for being with me. I do have more podcasts coming up. I'm going to be doing the astrology podcast. Probably I'll release that tomorrow, but I really wanted to get this essay out and just talk to you about Mother's Day and grief. And, when I have an emotion and I feel overwhelmed by it, I think, gosh, somebody's going to benefit from this. So I need to share it. And there we go. Have a wonderful day. Peaceful, gentle. Say no if you have to. Remember, you just say, Angie told me I should just say no today. And just because you say no this year doesn't mean you have to say no next year. With much love, I honor you. Thanks for listening to Centered with me, Angie Yingst. If you'd like to send me a question or comment about this show or any shows,
You can send them to Angie at themoonandstone.com.